This is a story about a trail. It's the story of the Oregon Trail, the journey west across America in the 1800s. And it's about what happened to people on the trail. More specifically, it's about what happened to them when they had to live with other people. When you hear stories about the Oregon Trail, you probably think about pioneers in Conestoga wagons, covered wagons pulled by oxen, driving through mountain passes, across plains and rivers, and over deserts. You might imagine a strong pioneer family, a father, mother, and children, traveling together in a close-knit group, surviving on the frontier and subsisting on their supplies until they can finally reach Oregon territory. But when most people traveled the Oregon Trail, they weren't alone. They were part of a wagon train. And those thousands of travelers created communities along the way, communities full of tempers and traditions, fights and flirtations, hard work, hardship, and hope. So here's a story about the Oregon Trail, about the people on the trail, and what really happened to them. The year is 1848, and you have just joined a wagon train that is preparing to leave Independence, Missouri, on the long journey west. There are about 80 wagons in your train, and each one carries a family with hopes of starting new lives in Oregon territory. There are farmers from Illinois, traders from New York, school teachers from Indiana, a doctor from Ohio, and a former hatter from Pennsylvania. There are young lovers and grandparents, mothers and children. There are people who know how to drive oxen and people who have never even seen a prairie. The morning after you arrived at Independence, someone shot a bear that came into the camp looking for food. And then the wagon train got to work, people unhitched oxen and set up camp. Then the train began its slow trek west. As the days pass, some of the people in your wagon train get sick. A child falls in a river and nearly drowns. An argument nearly turns into a fist fight when two men disagree about how to cross a stream. And when someone's ox is gored, the whole train must stop while they butcher the animal and save the meat. This is not easy work. Everyone has to pitch in. It's hot and dusty, and at night, when the temperature drops, everyone shares the same worries. You would not be the first to admit that traveling the Oregon Trail was hard, but ask anyone in the wagon train, and they will tell you that the hardest thing about the journey was not the physical challenges. The hunger or the dysentery, the constant fear of losing everything, the deadly obstacles on the trail, or even the loneliness that set in after months away from civilization. For many travelers, the hardest thing about the Oregon Trail was the people. Now, let's be honest, people aren't always easy. Sometimes they could be downright difficult. Remember that guy who almost started a fight over the stream? Well, as you get to know him, you discover that he's not actually that nice. He carries a pistol and a knife and drinks a lot of whiskey. He spends his evenings yelling at his wife and doesn't seem to have any other skills besides shooting. But as the journey continues, he teaches you something else about himself. He knows how to handle snakes. And when a prairie rattlesnake slithers into camp one evening, he scares it away without getting bitten. So now you see that this man may not be a great husband, but he's a useful member of the wagon train. There's a widow in the train with 3 children. She lost her husband just before the journey started, and her in-laws are bringing her to Oregon to live with her brother-in-law and sister-in-law. At first, she seems quiet and withdrawn, but then you notice that she's a skilled midwife. When a baby is born with the wagon train, she assists and comforts the mother and helps care for the child. Now you understand that she's strong and capable, even though she's alone. As the wagon train moves, the people in it change. You get to know them, their strengths and their weaknesses, their skills and their flaws. You also learn about their hopes for the future. Most of the people in your wagon train are traveling west because they want to claim land of their own, land where they can build a house and farm and raise their families. Maybe they're running from debt or seeking adventure or trying to escape the poverty they knew back east. And as you listen to their stories around the campfire, you realize that most of them are running towards something. They want a better life, They want a chance for their children that they themselves never had. And maybe they want a new beginning. You also learn that these people are very different. They come from different places and have different customs and beliefs. Some grew up in cities. Others have lived in the country their entire lives. Some are church-going Christians. Others don't believe in God. Some people chew tobacco and swear constantly. Others refuse to touch liquor or gamble. These differences sometimes cause problems. Arguments break out between travelers. Fistfights erupt at night in the camp. And when people lose faith in each other, they start moving faster, hoping to put more distance between them and the others. And yet, as the miles pass and the wagon train moves ever westward, the people begin to rely on each other as well. A flat tire slows the progress of the entire train. If someone gets sick, the people around them help take care of them. And if someone dies, the entire train stops to bury them. Soon you find yourself relying on your neighbors in the wagon train, working with them, trading with them, even depending on them. And you realize that this wagon train is not just a collection of covered wagons and oxen and supplies, but it's a community. And then you get to Oregon Territory and you look back at the trail and you wonder how you got there. You did it with the people in your wagon train. You endured the hardships of the journey with them, and you celebrated the small joys. Life on the Oregon Trail was complicated. It was hard and dangerous and lonely, but it was also hopeful. The people who traveled it understood that the challenges they faced as a community were greater than any single person could overcome alone. And that's why they helped each other. That's why they cooperated. That's why they traded and shared, because they had to. They didn't have a choice. We do and know exactly what happened to all the people in your wagon train after they reached Oregon. We don't know if they found the success and happiness they hoped for. We do know that the wagon train was part of a larger migration to the Pacific Northwest. Between 1841 and 1869, about 300,000 settlers traveled the Oregon Trail, and when they arrived in Oregon Territory, they stayed. They built homes and businesses. They worked together to create schools and churches and farms and towns. They became a community, the community of Oregon. And none of this would have been possible if people hadn't traveled the Oregon Trail together. So what happened to the people on the Oregon Trail? Well, they changed. They changed during the long days of work and the nights around the campfire. They changed because they had to rely on each other to survive. They changed because they were building a new life together. They changed because they were creating a community. And that's what happened to the people on the Oregon Trail, and that's the end of this story. Thank you for watching this episode of Crash Course Kids. This series is part of a larger project, and we want to thank all of our supporters for helping us bring these videos to kids all around the world. We'd especially like to thank today's sponsor. You can help us make more videos like this one by supporting Crash Course. To learn how you can help keep Crash Course free for everyone forever, visit our support page. In the mid-1800s, tens of thousands of Americans left their homes to trek across an unsettled continent in search of new lives. What could motivate such a mass migration? The lure of land, free land. Back then, owning property was the surest way to achieve financial stability. But in the East, farms were getting harder to come by and more expensive, too. So many turned their eyes westward to lands where the government was handing out homesteads for next to nothing. The catch, you had to get there first, and once you did, you'd have to build a home on the frontier. Life was hard, but it was also full of possibility. It was a chance to reinvent yourself, to forge a new life, to become your own person. Or, if you were enslaved, it was a chance for freedom. Between 1840 and 1910, about 300,000 African Americans moved west, seeking a better life away from the poverty and persecution of the South. But with people came problems. Disputes were inevitable. Most common were arguments about priorities, when to stop, where to camp, how fast to move, or which trail to take when the path split. Sometimes those disagreements could turn violent, which is why early on, many wagon trains elected leaders, captains who guided the train and settled disputes. These leaders emerged naturally, often based on age, experience, or sheer confidence. Sometimes formal. At the start of the journey, men would gather and vote on who would lead them. A captain kept order and settled arguments among members of the train. But leadership didn't guarantee peace. Imagine your ox breaks a leg. You ask the train to stop for a day while you repair your wagon or butcher the animal for meat. Some families might agree. Others, they're anxious to reach the next river crossing or beat the coming snow in the mountains. You argue, voices raise, time ticks by. You're not in the safety of a town anymore. There's no sheriff, no judge, no laws, at least not any that can be enforced by a badge. That's where frontier justice came in. Rules of the road were agreed upon before departure, informal codes covering theft, violence, and disputes. If someone stole food, livestock, or supplies, they could be punished by the group. Punishments ranged from public shaming to expulsion from the wagon train, effectively a death sentence. If you got into a fist fight, the captain might separate you from the group, leaving you to make your way alone to the next jail stop, or simply banish you from the company altogether. It was a rough existence. Frontier life demanded hard work, endurance, and courage. Sickness and death lurked around every bend. The journey west took grit, determination, and above all, community. Travelers relied on one another for everything from food and shelter to protection and, when necessary, punishment. Today, we remember the pioneers who braved the journey west and built the foundations of new towns and eventually new states. We think of them as rugged individuals, strong-willed and self-reliant. But in fact, it was their ability to work together, to rely on each other, and to form tight-knit communities in the most inhospitable environments that allowed them to succeed where so many others had failed. Hi, I'm your host, and this is a History Hot Tip. When you picture pioneers trekking across the American frontier, you probably imagine lone wolves, maybe a family or two, self-reliant folks ready to chart their own paths in a wild new land. But that image is only part of the story. In reality, many pioneers traveled in groups for safety and mutual support, especially during the difficult journeys along the Oregon, California, and Mormon trails. These travelers relied on each other for everything from food and shelter to protection and, when necessary, punishment. They worked together to overcome the challenges of the journey, and they looked out for one another along the way. So when you're thinking about pioneers, remember, they didn't just blaze trails, they blazed them together. To learn more about these historic journeys, check out the additional resources. Now that you know more about how pioneers traveled, how do you think their group experiences compare to modern travel? Leave your thoughts in a comment below, and while you're at it, tell us what you want to learn about next. Who knows? Your ideas might end up in a future episode. To help us produce these free educational videos, consider making a donation. The Oregon Trail was a journey fraught with peril. Travelers faced dangers around every bend, including other travelers. Along the way, disputes would arise over everything from oxen to burial grounds. When conflicts did arise, the pioneers had to rely on each other to settle them. They developed a system of makeshift courts to deliver justice along the trail. In serious cases, makeshift courts were held. A jury of fellow travelers might hear both sides of a dispute and decide on an action. There was no appeal, decisions were final, and enforcement fell to the group's sense of honor, or more likely, survival instinct. One dramatic account from 1849 tells of a man caught stealing flour. The pioneers brought him before a judge, and he was found guilty. It was decided that he should be forced to walk behind the train for 2 days with a sign that read THIEF pinned to his back. Other accounts tell of men who were forced to give up their rifles for illegal hunting or who were told to walk instead of ride for various offenses. Courts like these were rare but necessary. Without law enforcement along most of the trail, it was up to the travelers to enforce order among themselves. When a crime was committed, a ringleader called a primary was usually the first to step in. The primary was the person in charge of each wagon train. He was elected by the group and responsible for maintaining order among his charges. For example, when members of one company hunted illegally on the Sabbath, the primary fined them $5 per person for breaking the group's laws. When the men refused to pay, the primary had them arrested. Another time, a drunk man ran away from camp and got lost. The primary sent two others back to find him. After searching for 5 hours, they returned without him. The primary then had them tied up to their wagons so they wouldn't run away again. Sometimes the primary had to deal with more serious issues. At one point, a murder occurred at a campsite. When the primary heard about it, he rounded up everyone in the company and forced them to sit in a circle until the murderer came forward and confessed. In general, primaries were responsible for keeping the peace along the trail. They issued fines, made arrests, and even hung criminals if necessary. The court was also there to protect property rights. Along the Oregon Trail, land was communal property. People could hunt, camp, or gather berries wherever they wanted. However, once someone claimed a piece of land for farming, the court upheld that right. One time, a man named Caleb Cope built a fort near Fort Laramie, hoping to make money selling meat to passing travelers. Unfortunately for him, the location was perfect and soon a large group of immigrants settled down around him. Seeing dollar signs, Cope claimed the entire area as his own and charged people for the right to pass through. Eventually, the frustrated settlers took Cope to court. The judges ordered him to stop charging tolls immediately and let the immigrants use his fort for free. These courts could also be called upon to settle arguments about leadership. If the primary was accused of abusing his authority, he could be tried by the court. Sometimes the court had to rule on matters of life and death. A big problem on the Oregon Trail was deserters. These were people who left the relative safety of a wagon train to try to get to Oregon alone. Deserters risked starvation, exposure, wild animals, and hostile Native Americans. Usually, however, they deserted for a simpler reason. They were sick of the slow pace of the train. Since everyone shared resources, food, and supplies, a faster journey meant more food for everyone. So, some people were willing to take great risks to speed things up. When a group of men wanted to leave a train, however, the primary would often prevent them from doing so. This led to arguments between the primaries, and the court had to decide who was right. In one case, a primary planned to stop for the winter. Some immigrants wanted to keep going, so they appealed to the court. The judges agreed with the primary, though, and the people who wanted to continue on were arrested for trying to break up the company. Traveling on the Oregon Trail was already hard enough. Having constant arguments didn't make things any easier. Disagreements and bickering went hand in hand with pioneer life. For example, along the way, travelers had to make many decisions as a group: where they would stop for the night, how long they would stay in one spot, what they would do about river crossings, and how they would handle conflicts with Native Americans. All of these decisions were made democratically. Every man in the group got a vote. While this system worked well sometimes, it wasn't always effective. One time, a group was deciding whether to spend a day resting or pushing on to a better campsite when an argument started. The discussion became so heated that the primary had to break it up. The next day, a violent storm blew through and destroyed the wagons that had stayed behind. Had they pushed on, as some argued, they would have reached the new camp in time and saved their possessions. In another case, a group was arguing about which direction to go. Should they head up a river or over a mountain pass? Each side had its pros and cons. Finally, a young boy piped up and suggested they flip a coin. The adults thought it was a good idea and decided to do just that. They flipped a silver dollar. Heads, they would travel up the river. Tails, they would go over the mountain. The coin landed on tails and the group began to move. A few miles later, they saw smoke rising in the distance. To their horror, it was the rest of their train. Someone had suggested the same coin toss and the group had been arguing about it for hours. By the time they joined back up, the travelers were furious and several more arguments almost broke out. Traveling on the Oregon Trail was hard enough without fighting with each other. The threat of wild animals, Native Americans, and the elements was enough stress to deal with. So when something upset people, they had to resolve it quickly, otherwise it could get out of hand. For most of the journey, everyone traveled together, sharing supplies and helping each other out. Occasionally, though, a wagon train would split up. Smaller groups were more vulnerable to sickness, injury, or mechanical failure, but some people were willing to risk it all for the chance to avoid the constant bickering. At times, the tension along the Oregon Trail would become too much for some people to bear. Disagreements over supplies, leadership, or schedules could drive a wedge between friends and even families. Sometimes people would argue so much that they would abandon their wagons and the supplies inside them. In one case, a man left his wagon because of an argument over a broken wheel. When the group finally reached Oregon, he found that someone had stolen all his stuff. On another occasion, a woman and her family abandoned their wagon after a fight with a neighbor. A few days later, they came across a ranch where they could get supplies. When they told the owner about their lost belongings, he said, "Don't you worry. I'll fix you up now." He gave them new supplies and they continued on their way. In fact, the owner had done this many times before and he knew the couple would never pay him back. Sure enough, when he found their abandoned wagon, he stripped it of everything he could use and left the rest for the next poor travelers to find. But still, despite all the interpersonal drama that could occur, cooperation was still essential. Groups traveling along the Oregon Trail depended on each other to help cross rivers. Wagons had to be floated, ferried, or dragged. Stuck wheels had to be freed. Fires had to be tended. Injured travelers had to be cared for. Graves, when needed, had to be dug. These tasks were not only necessary for the journey, they were also opportunities for the pioneers to show their compassion and strength. It was common for neighbors and friends to carry out this somber duty, and at times an entire community would turn out to bury one of their own. The digging of graves along the Oregon Trail was a grim but necessary part of life. There were few rituals the pioneers would not perform to ensure that the dead received a proper send-off. Some graves were marked with simple wooden headstones, while others were left unmarked. But all of them were a testament to the hardships of the journey. Even in death, the pioneers were not spared from the challenges of the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail was a test of endurance. Not only did travelers have to endure the physical hardships of the journey, they also had to deal with the emotional toll of life on the frontier. They had to cooperate with each other in order to survive, but that wasn't always easy. They had to deal with land disputes, legal issues, and even deaths. But the pioneers were a hardy lot, and they persevered. They followed the Oregon Trail into the unknown, hoping for a better life in the West. You're invited to join us today for an exploration of life on the Oregon Trail. Imagine being 32 years old and nearly 7 months pregnant. Now add a raging cholera epidemic and a 1,000-mile trek across the Great Plains to the equation. If this sounds like a recipe for disaster, that's because it is. But if it's your reality, you may find a surprising ally in Merryfields. We've all heard the saying that behind every great man is an even greater woman. In many ways, this couldn't be more true of those who traveled west on the Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail was not just a path to the Pacific Northwest. It was a passage fraught with hardship and peril, both natural and human-made. And yet thousands of families ventured onto this rugged road seeking new lives. And it was the women who often provided the emotional and practical backbone needed to keep the wagon train moving forward. Before we dive into their tales, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through history. I'm here to guide you through tales of daring pioneers, treacherous landscapes, and the indomitable spirit that pushed humanity to explore the unknown. Your support means everything to me and allows me to continue sharing these captivating stories. So let's hit the trail together and see where the adventure takes us. The year is 1849, and you've just arrived at Independence, Missouri, ready to begin your journey to the Willamette Valley. At the Independence Landing, you meet up with other travelers and soon find yourself part of a growing wagon train. Life on the trail is not what you expected. Days are filled with the rhythm of travel, the creak of wagon wheels, and the lowing of oxen. The air is thick with dust, sweat, and wood smoke, and nights are cool and often lonely. You've left behind the familiar streets of civilization for the unpredictable wilderness of the frontier. The responsibility of providing food for the family falls largely on women's shoulders. Before sunrise, they're already up preparing breakfast for their families while the men tend to the oxen. The morning meal is a simple affair, perhaps some boiled eggs, bacon, and biscuits. As the day wears on, the smell of baking bread drifts from the covered wagon. The rhythmic slap of dough against the roof as the baker's wife kneads her sourdough starter. Children, too, have chores. They gather firewood, care for younger siblings, and help mend clothing. For older boys, tasks include caring for animals, assisting with repairs, and learning the skills of frontier life. Meanwhile, their sisters learn domestic skills, helping with cooking, cleaning, and sewing, preparing them for their roles as future wives and mothers. As the sun dips below the horizon, the family gathers around a lantern light for supper. The evening meal is a time for sharing stories of the day's journey and planning for the next. The flickering light dances in the eyes of the children as they listen intently to tales of adventure and the promise of the Oregon Territory. Often it's the father who regales them with stories of bravery and resilience, reminding them that their journey is one of hope and opportunity. Sometimes, though, it's the mother who steps into the role of storyteller, weaving tales that blend reality and imagination, keeping their spirits high during the long, lonely nights. The journey isn't without its challenges. The terrain is rough and unpredictable. River crossings can be treacherous, and diseases like cholera cast a dark shadow over the wagon train. But throughout these hardships, the family sticks together. They rely on each other for support, sharing stories that lift their spirits and keep their hopes alive. Their bond is strengthened by the shared experience, creating memories that will last a lifetime. In the heart of America's vast wilderness, two paths diverge, one leading to the sunset and the other deeper into the wild unknown. As the family approaches the base of the Rocky Mountains, a crucial decision awaits them. Will they continue their journey or turn back? The men of the family huddle around the wagon, discussing the route ahead. Theirs is a solemn task, one fraught with danger and uncertainty. The path to the west is littered with the stories of those who have tried and failed, yet the promise of a new life in Oregon keeps them moving forward. Their decision is not just about personal dreams, but about the safety of their family and their legacy. Each step into the mountains brings new challenges. The air grows thinner, the climbs steeper, and the days shorter. The weight of their journey seems to grow heavier with every mile, yet the family presses on, driven by a shared purpose and the belief in a brighter future. Meanwhile, inside the wagon, their wife and mother holds a different kind of counsel. She tends to a small fire, the flickering light revealing the lines of worrying on her face. She knows the risks of the journey as well as any frontiersman, but her fears are different. She worries about the impact of the journey on her children, about the toll it's taking on her husband, and about the strength she must summon within herself. The journey has been a test of endurance, but it's also been a crucible that has forged their family into something stronger. The harsh realities of frontier life have stripped away pretense and revealed the raw essence of their bond. They've faced the harshest nature can throw at them, and they've done it together. As a family, they've become more than just a group of travelers. They've become a team, a unit, a family. Their story is far from over. They still have miles to cover and challenges to face. But they know that whatever lies ahead, they'll face it together. Their journey is a testament to the power of the human spirit, the strength of family bonds, and the allure of the American frontier. Now, please stay tuned for more historical adventures right here. A common trope in Western films is the lone traveler walking into a saloon and announcing that he is looking for somebody, perhaps a notorious outlaw or the man who killed his brother. The bartender will lean in and say something like, "You're looking for that son of a gun stranger." Well, it's a hard line of work you've chosen because, and then with a conspiratorial wink, "He ain't from around here." We can almost hear the lonely traveler sigh and shake his head in disbelief at how people invent all kinds of obstacles to keep him from accomplishing his mission. The truth is that while some travelers did journey west alone, most people heading out on the Oregon Trail did so as part of a wagon train. In fact, many native groups helped travelers, offered guidance, traded goods, or pointed out safer routes. But settler rumors and anxieties often turned any encounter into a standoff. This fear fostered solidarity among wagon trains, even when personalities clashed. Safety in numbers was the rule, and the more people you had, the better. There is power in a group, and no one knew that better than the pioneers. Settlers usually traveled west in groups of 50 to 100 wagons. Each wagon held about 6 people, 2 parents, 3 small children, and a single hired hand. This arrangement made sense since no one wanted to be caught without enough hands to unload cargo or care for oxen when the time came. The sheer number of people in a wagon train sometimes made it difficult to find service for merchants traveling along trails, but it also gave the settlers the ability to pool their resources in the event of a crisis. A larger group could provide for its members through hunting, trading, and gathering wild edibles. If a sickness struck a camp, several families could pitch in to take care of those who were too ill to work. Even the threat of attack from Native Americans or wild animals could be mitigated if everyone pitched in to defend the train. But not everyone was happy in such close quarters. Individual needs had to be balanced against the safety and success of the entire company. Personal schedules and routines went out the window, and the emphasis on group harmony sometimes led to serious social issues. There were fights over rules and punishments for breaking them. Wagon trains were democratic, self-governing communities for the duration of the journey. Every adult male was a member of the group and thus eligible to participate in the process of making decisions. Although rarely formally elected, captains and leaders emerged naturally as a result of their influence or abilities. Such leadership often fell to older men with previous experience as frontiersmen, storekeepers, or farmers. Other members of the train looked up to them and followed their advice. This form of communal decision-making was often necessary when travelers had to plan for situations that required preparation, like river crossings. Groups were organized by age and gender. Women and children typically assisted with chores like cooking, cleaning, and mending. Men took care of the oxen, maintained the wagons, and defended the train. Tasks were often divided between the various able-bodied men. Some men were designated as guards and were responsible for waking during the night to watch out for danger. Others were given charge of minor repairs. Still others were in charge of ensuring the group had sufficient firewood or game for the evening meal. The concept of childhood itself was somewhat fluid in frontier culture. Children as young as 8 years old were expected to perform chores appropriate for their age. Many pioneers brought along a small supply of toys and games to entertain their kids, but most children amused themselves by mimicking the adults around them. A typical day on the trail started early. At first light, the travelers would rise and begin their daily routine. Camp chores had to be completed before the train could move out. Tents and beds were packed up, breakfast was cooked and eaten, and the oxen were hitched to the wagons. Oxen were the primary draft animal for westward travelers. They were sturdy, sure-footed, and resistant to snake bite, which made them ideal for traversing rugged terrain. Unfortunately, they were also slow and could only travel about 20 miles per day. So it was a long, slow process to reach new campsites. Some members of the train would ride on horseback to scout ahead for potential problems or an appropriate place to set up camp. When the time came, a call was sounded. Travelers loaded up their wagons, unhitched their oxen, and prepared to move on. While life on the trail was carefully regimented, there was still room for spontaneity. Travelers were often at the mercy of the elements and had to be ready to adjust their plans on a moment's notice. For example, if a storm rolled in, they might need to wait for it to pass before continuing on. River crossings were also fraught with peril and frequently caused delays. Travelers couldn't cross a river when its water level was high or the ground was muddy, and they had to wait for conditions to improve. These sorts of events gave travelers an opportunity to stretch their legs, forage for food, bathe, and attend to other matters that were generally off limits during the long days on the road. Travelers ate mostly what they grew. Wheat and flour were staples, and each family had a supply that lasted the entire trip. Bacon and salt pork preserved well and added protein to meals. Dried fruits and berries supplemented fresh ones picked along the way. Game was sometimes available, but hunting was a low priority. Settlers relied primarily on the fertile land they found along the trail. Vegetables and fruit grew in abundance, and travelers used every bit of edible vegetation they came across. In general, people tended to stay on the healthier side of the equation. However, certain plants could be poisonous, and some roots were so bitter they were considered unfit for consumption. This sort of trial and error was a delicate balancing act. Of course, diseases did claim victims along the way, and it wasn't uncommon for whole wagon trains to be wiped out by cholera, smallpox, or dysentery. On the Oregon Trail, no 2 days were exactly alike, but most began and ended with the same rituals. Travelers built fires to cook their food, keep warm, or burn trash. Each night, a member of the train volunteered to keep watch while the rest slept. It was lonely and dangerous work, but someone had to do it. Most nights, the guard sat quietly and patiently, watching the fire and listening for sounds of danger. Occasionally, though, they saw something that made their blood run cold, a pair of glowing eyes peering at them from the darkness. Then the guard's job was to grab his rifle and chase the beast away. Coyotes, wolves, bears, and mountain lions prowled the prairie at night, searching for easy prey. For the guard, keeping these predators away meant the difference between a peaceful night's sleep and a frantic flight in the middle of the night. When a guard spotted an animal, he yelled, "Beware, beware," and grabbed his rifle. All the men slept with their weapons nearby, and the women and children were quick to hide under their beds. When the men chased the animal away, they returned to their posts, relieved that the night was passing without incident. Once the sun rose and the danger had passed, the men would break camp, load the wagons, and start the long trek toward the next stop. Each wagon train was a microcosm of American society in the mid-1800s, containing within it a community of values and beliefs. While the primary objective was reaching Oregon, the journey itself was just as important. It was an opportunity to build a new life, and the wagon train was a critical component of that. The American frontier had been shaped by solitary figures who forged ahead of civilization to tame the wilderness. It was natural to assume that these qualities of rugged individualism would continue into the future. However, the reality of the Oregon Trail showed that the pioneers depended on each other. To survive, they had to learn to cooperate and work together. The loans were a problem, but the group was stronger without them. Every train had them: the odd old man who kept to himself, the quiet woman who never joined campfire stories, the family that never quite fit in. They didn't always cause problems, but they didn't help either. Sometimes these loners would drop away from the train altogether, vanish one morning, or fall behind. No one asked too many questions because out there on the trail, mystery was just another part of survival. In this strange, temporary society, people learned to balance cooperation and independence, rules and flexibility, trust and suspicion. To succeed on the Oregon Trail, travelers needed more than oxen, supplies, and determination. They needed each other. Today, you might have driven across the Great Plains in less than a day, 600 miles per hour, air-conditioned comfort. But in the mid-1800s, traveling across America's untamed wilderness was a journey of months over thousands of miles, a test of endurance that pushed people to their limits. That is exactly what happens in today's episode. The year is 1848, and you are part of a wagon train bound for Oregon's Willamette Valley. With nearly 1,000 settlers, teamsters, and children ready to start the long trek west, the group plans to depart Independence, Missouri. As you help load your family's supplies onto the wagon, your stomach churns at the thought of what lies ahead. Your father has told you stories of the treacherous terrain, the unforgiving weather, and the threat of disease and starvation that looms over travelers who dare to venture west. But the lure of a new life, an escape from the crowded streets and strict laws of civilization, has drawn your family and many others like pioneers before you to the call of the wild frontier. As the wagon train begins its slow crawl westward, you settle into your new life on the trail. Days turn into weeks and the landscape blurs into a monotonous rhythm of rolling plains and endless skies. Boredom sets in, and you find yourself yearning for the comforts of home. There is little to do on the trail but tend to the livestock, mend the wagons, and keep watch for danger. Most days you and the other children play games, read books, and tell stories around the campfire while the adults work. At night, the campfire provides warmth and light against the darkness, and the close quarters foster a sense of community among the travelers. One evening, as the group is gathered around the campfire, there is a commotion at the edge of the camp. A lone rider has approached and is now standing before the group. His face is weathered and his clothes are dusty, and he looks haggard, his eyes filled with a wild look. He introduces himself as a survivor of an attack by Native Americans and warns the group that they are in danger. If they continue on this path, the same fate awaits them. Fear grips your heart as you listen to his tale of death and destruction. Some of the men in the group argue with him, convinced he is lying. Others believe him and clamor for a change of route. Tension fills the air, threatening to tear the fragile bonds of the wagon train apart. It's up to you now to convince both sides to come together, ease the tension, and choose a path forward. Remember, the safety of the entire wagon train rests on your shoulders. Will you be able to guide them to safety? This story is an example of a narrative experience designed to let you explore pivotal moments in history through your own choices. Our aim is to transport you back in time and allow you to feel the excitement, challenges, and dilemmas faced by those who came before us. We hope that by making decisions and experiencing the consequences, you will gain a deeper understanding and appreciation for the complexities of the past. Now, let's go back to the video. Now you're on the Oregon Trail, and there's no turning back. You've left the familiar landscapes of civilization behind, trading the comforting sounds of city life for the haunting cries of coyotes and the rustling whispers of the wind through the tall grasses. The steady creak of wagon wheels on the dusty trail becomes the soundtrack to your existence, a monotonous rhythm that echoes the relentless march of time. Each mile brings new challenges, testing your resourcefulness and resilience. Broken axles, blistered oxen, and dwindling food supplies become daily concerns. The vastness of the prairie, once awe-inspiring, now feels oppressive, stretching endlessly in all directions, a stark reminder of how isolated and vulnerable you are in this unforgiving wilderness. The trail is not just a path, it's a battleground. Every step forward is a victory against the elements, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the pioneers who came before you. Yet, as the journey drags on, the allure of the distant Oregon Territory begins to fade, replaced by the harsh realities of the present moment. The weight of each decision, every choice you make along the way, determines whether you and your family will reach the promised land. And now a river blocks your path, a seemingly endless stretch of water separating you from the Willamette Valley. Crossing this river will be a great challenge. Many travelers have lost everything trying to navigate its unpredictable currents. But you have studied the river for days, watching its moods and its flow, searching for a path through. You know that a direct crossing is too risky. The current is swift and unpredictable. So instead, you decide to take a detour, traveling several miles up the riverbank in search of a shallower spot. The journey upstream is fraught with peril. The riverbed is littered with hidden rocks and fallen logs, and the oxen must navigate treacherous mud pits and steep embankments. The constant threat of injury, or worse, hangs over the expedition, testing the strength and skill of your team's driver. Just when hope begins to dwindle and exhaustion takes its toll, you spot a narrow channel leading into the river. With renewed determination, you lead the team down the embankment and into the water. The crossing is perilous, but your careful planning and the skill of the drivers pay off. The wagons are safely on the far bank, but your ordeal is far from over. Now you must unload the wagons and ford the remaining distance on foot. As you wade into the icy water, the weight of responsibility presses down on you. You know that even a small mistake could cost lives. The river may seem calm now, but its power is never far from the surface. Will you successfully navigate the crossing and keep your fellow travelers safe, or will the river claim your hopes and dreams of a new life in Oregon? Navigating the challenges of the Oregon Trail requires more than just luck. It demands strategy, adaptability, and a fair amount of know-how. Let's talk about a few key things you need to succeed on the Oregon Trail. First and foremost, choosing the right time to embark on your journey is crucial. The optimal period to start your trek is in the spring after the winter snows have melted, but before the summer heat and insect-borne diseases arrive. Arriving in Oregon's Willamette Valley around September would be ideal. This window allows you to beat the severe winter conditions and enjoy relatively mild weather during your journey. Next, you need to assemble a reliable wagon train. The size of your group can range from a small family unit to a large party consisting of several families. Larger groups offer more security against potential threats such as Native American attacks or wild animals. However, managing a larger group can also lead to internal conflicts and tensions. Resource management is critical for survival on the Oregon Trail. You will need a steady supply of food and water for both yourself and your animals. Planning your route to ensure access to these resources is vital. Hunting along the way can supplement your food supply, but it's essential to maintain a balance between hunting and conserving energy for the journey. Finally, understanding and respecting the land you're traveling through is paramount. Interacting with Native American tribes along the way requires diplomacy and respect. Learning about local customs and being prepared to trade or negotiate can help maintain peaceful relations. Understanding the natural environment and adapting to its challenges, such as finding shelter during storms or navigating difficult terrains, is also crucial for your survival. With careful planning, resource management, and an understanding of the challenges that lie ahead, you can increase your chances of successfully reaching the Oregon Territory and starting a new life in the Willamette Valley. But remember, the Oregon Trail is a perilous journey. Will you rise to the challenges that await you? As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the prairie, you find yourself at a fork in the road. The well-worn path ahead leads to Independence Rock, a towering granite monolith that has witnessed the struggles and triumphs of countless travelers before you. To the right, a faint trail beckons, hinting at a shortcut that could shave days off your journey. The decision weighs heavily on you. Do you stick to the familiar path, choosing safety and camaraderie, or do you venture off the beaten track, risking isolation and uncertainty for a chance at a quicker journey? Whichever path you choose, know that the spirit of the trail is relentless, offering no quarter and demanding your full attention. Your journey is far from over, and the challenges that lie ahead will test your resolve and determination. The Oregon Trail is a crucible of human endurance, where the boundaries between triumph and tragedy are often blurred. Choose wisely, for every decision brings you closer to your destiny in the Oregon Territory. And so our journey along the Oregon Trail continues. What path will you take? Will you heed the advice of seasoned travelers and stick to the well-worn path to Independence Rock, or will you dare to venture off the beaten track in search of a quicker route to the Willamette Valley? Your choice will have far-reaching consequences, shaping not only the duration of your journey, but also the challenges and opportunities that await you. If you want to learn more about the Oregon Trail, we highly recommend checking out additional resources for a deeper dive into this pivotal chapter of American history. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Trails and Tales. If you enjoyed this adventure, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe for more thrilling journeys through history. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell us which historical trail you'd like to explore next. Until then, stay adventurous and keep exploring the world.